friends, welcome back to my channel Planty Princess. My name is Ashley. Today we are going to do something a little bit different. I'm so excited to do this video, share it with you. We are going to be doing a rare plant dupe video. So basically I have a list of 8 plants that are either rare, more expensive, or relatively uncommon. And I'm going to be sharing with you plants that I find are very similar and should fulfill that satisfaction if you can't get your hands on the real deal. Now, the dupes I chose for these plants, of course, they are not duplicates. They are just plants that in some way, shape, or form are very identical, have very similar characteristics, and like I said, should give you that same satisfaction of the actual rare, uncommon, or expensive plant. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into this video. So the first plant I have is actually one of the top plants that was on my 2021 wish list. Still on my wish list today. I will one day have this plant in my collection. That is the Philodendron caramel marble. Now this plant is a very wide-leaved plant and it kind of has little jigsawed sides to it. The variegation is so gorgeous. It has like a creamy and green variegation with different shades of green, and with enough light it can also get a sort of pinkish orangey tint to it. Now this plant does get relatively expensive. This plant goes for between $5,000 and $12,000. So that is outrageous. I found a few that were around $5,000 with 2 to 3 leaves, which is still a pretty crazy price. Now the dupe I found for this plant is the Variegated Philodendron Ring of Fire. The Philodendron Ring of Fire has a very similar look in leaf shape and variegation. The leaves also have that jigsaw-y type edging to them, which is a very unique shape for a leaf in general. So both these plants I find absolutely gorgeous. Now, although I don't have the caramel marble in my collection, I do have a Ring of Fire and I absolutely love it. So as I just mentioned, the leaf shape is very similar to the caramel marble. The variegation is very similar. The Philodendron Ring of Fire also does, with enough sun, get that pinkish orangey coloring to it as well. So if you're looking for the Philodendron caramel marble and it's a little out of your reach, or you're saving up for it like I am, that's not something that I will be able to obtain for probably a few years. So the Ring of Fire definitely does bring to my collection the same features and the same characteristics that the caramel marble does. The only difference I would say is the caramel marble definitely does have wider leaves and the Ring of Fire has a more thinner leaf. We'll move on to the next plant on this dupe list, and that is the Variegated Philodendron Domesticum. This is a plant that I just recently required with a trade. My plant, though, unfortunately has settled down on the variegation. Hopefully I can chop it up, prop it up, and get some of that variegation back, but we will see. So anyways, this plant is such a gorgeous plant. This plant goes for between $200 and $600. Everything I could find, most of them were at that higher end of that spectrum. This plant has sort of like an elongated heart-shaped leaf with that creamy lime green variegation. Now, these next 2 plants, I actually am using the same dupe because I found very similar characteristics with the dupe in both of these plants. And that would be the Variegated Philodendron Burle Marx, or Burle Marx, however you want to pronounce that. The Burle Marx has the same kind of heart-shaped look to it, as well as that creamy lime green variegation. So these 2 plants are very, very similar. I think the main difference, once again, I would point out between the 2 is the Domesticum probably gets a little bit larger leaves and they're a little more wider at the top. But especially when they're in their juvenile form, they are very, very similar in their juvenile form. But again, when you get to that more mature stage and the leaves start to develop a little bit differently, the Domesticum definitely has a wider top to it. So the Burle Marx, you can get a pretty good sized plant. And now this is a plant, when I first started doing this video, when I first started preparing for this video, it was probably last year sometime. And the Burle Marx was, I think, at its lowest price ever. Since then, it has gone up a little bit in price, but even still, at this current time, you can still find a decent sized plant for between $90 and $125, which isn't too bad considering, you know, the alternative would be $200 to $600, closer to that higher end spectrum. So this is definitely a good dupe plant for the Domesticum if you're looking for that heart-shaped, longer type leaf with that creamy lime green splashy variegation. It is a great one to choose. Next on my list is another one that I had on my 2021 wish list, and once again is still on my wish list today. This was also actually on my resolutions list for 2022 to acquire this plant and add it into my collection. That is the Variegated Philodendron Billietiae. That plant goes for between $2,500 and $14,000, which is crazy. This plant is super expensive, but it is a very gorgeous and a very unique plant. This plant definitely has its, between the leaf shape and the variegation, the combination of the two, it is just a statement piece. Now, I do not have one currently in my collection, obviously because I do want this plant. I have done a lot of research on it, and other than its beauty, I hear all negative things. I hear this plant is super hard to take care of. It's super hard to maintain that variegation and bring that variegation out. So is it worth the money? That I'm going to leave up to you. I am definitely willing to, you know, save up and get a small cutting of this plant and see how I can make this plant grow and, you know, see if it can bring me happiness and joy. And again, hopefully spread it into the community to make this plant a little bit more available to the plant community. So that's that. As I mentioned with the last plant, the same dupe I have for this plant is again the Variegated Philodendron Burle Marx. Again, that plant is between $90 and $125, but the similarities between these two is again with the variegation. The leaf shape is definitely a lot different. They both do have that heart shape, especially near the top of the leaf, but the Billietiae is definitely a lot more thinner and narrow and like longer. So it may not necessarily be thinner, but it has that more elongated look, which gives it the appearance to have a little bit more of a narrow leaf. Moving on is another one that I did want in my collection. It's not really at the tippy top anymore, and I did get a variety of this plant, just not this particular plant. That is the Variegated Monstera Adansonii. Today I am going to be featuring the Albo. So the Albo goes between $1,500 and $2,500 for a small cutting. This plant is really beautiful though. If you like that white, stark white variegation, this is the type of plant that you will really like. When the leaves first grow in, they seem to be more of a creamy color, but as they harden off, you do get that very stark, crisp white variegation. A great dupe for this plant would be the Epipremnum Pinnatum Variegata. I also think this can also be considered an Albo, like Epipremnum Pinnatum Albo, I think it also goes by. This plant also does have a little bit of that creamy, but also that crisp, stark white variegation. The leaf shapes are also a little similar. I would say the Adansonii maybe is a little bit more of like a wider leaf, but the variegation is very similar, and the way the variegation sits on the leaf is also very similar. Another thing that could interest you in the Pinnatum is if you like that fenestrations. Epipremnum Pinnatums can also get some fenestrations to them. Sometimes they can get tiny holes in the middle, but as they mature, they do get more of like a Deliciosa or like a Rhaphidophora fenestration to them, more so on like the outer edges of the leaf, but they can get some small fenestrations toward the inner side of the leaf. Either way, this definitely is a plant that can give you that can fulfill that need of the, you know, the Adansonii, the Variegated Adansonii Albo, because it is so similar, and this plant also is a very stunning plant. While we're talking about this plant, these two plants, I just want to put out a warning, I guess, or a caution. While doing this research for this plant, I did see a lot of listings trying to sell Epipremnum Pinnatums as Variegated Adansonii. So please, if you do not know the difference and you're looking into either one of these plants, specifically the Variegated Adansonii, being that one does go for a lot more money, definitely make sure you know what you're buying, because people are trying to sell the Epipremnum Pinnatum for the variegated Adansonii. Before we move on, the Pinnatum goes for $50 to $125 depending on size. When you're getting up to that higher end spectrum, you are going to get a plant with between 3 and 5 leaves. So again, compared to the price of the rare plant, that's not too bad. Moving on, we have the Philodendron Joepii. This plant is, again, another plant with a very unique, like, eye-capturing leaf shape. It has very nice distinct ears, a very thin interlobe, and then the bottom just gets really wide. It is really a gorgeous plant. Again, this plant is running from $1,500 to $2,500 approximately for, you know, just like a one leaf cutting. I did find a few, just for like, you know, a small plant, I did find a few one leaf plants for right around $1,000. But again, this plant is at the higher end spectrum. I think more than, you know, obviously the cost is a little more expensive, but for this plant, I think the big thing is the accessibility. I didn't see too many of them for sale. Now this plant, even on the lobes and on the skinny part of the stem, you do get that kind of like crinkle wavy effect going on the leaves, which I think is what brings, aside from, you know, that really skinny drastic into the belly of the leaf, that little crinkling is really what attracts people to this plant. It is so beautiful. The duplicate, I'm sure if you know this plant, you probably know that the duplicate for this plant is the Philodendron 69686. This plant goes for between $50 and $150. I saw a lot of 3 to 4 leaf plants going for right around $65. So that's really not too bad. This plant has the same shape as the Joepii. It has, you know, those distinct lobes. It does get a little skinnier as you go down the leaf, and then has that wider belly. I think the main difference between the two is on that real thin part, it doesn't get so wavy. I also think on the Joepii, it's more of a like elongated inner thin of the leaf. It's more longer and elongated. It's more pronounced than the Philodendron 69686. But in general, the leaf shape is very similar. And if you're attracted to that type of leaf shape, I think the Philodendron 69686 will fulfill and give you that joy that the Joepii would. Next up, we have, this is like the holy grail of philodendrons. If you are really into plants and you've been collecting for some time, I'm sure you know what plant I'm going to be referring to. This plant is the Philodendron Spiritus Sancti. Like I just mentioned, this is like the holy grail of philodendrons. This is the rarest philodendron out there today. In fact, a quick fun fact, this plant is found more in collectors' collections than it is in the wild. This is an endangered species of the philodendron, which is why it is so expensive, which is why it is so rare. The fact that it is found more in collections than in its natural environment is just crazy to me. So that is really what is driving this plant price up to the extremity that it is. I only saw one of these plants for sale. It was a juvenile form that had 4 leaves for $27,505. That is completely outrageous. This plant, it has, again, it's a philodendron, it's an aroid. It does have a heart-shaped leaf, but the lobes are super elongated in that heart-shaped form, and then the leaf is super elongated going down into the body of the leaf. So the dupe I have for this beautiful, beautiful plant is the Philodendron Billietiae and Atabopoense cross. This plant is also known as the dark Billietiae or the black Billietiae. It's a little bit of a controversy if this plant really is a cross between the two or just another form of the Billietiae. Either way, this plant does have a lot of similar characteristics to the Spiritus Sancti. It does extend, it does have that heart-shaped leaf, it does extend in the upper lobes, and it does again have that long, narrow body on the leaf. This one, it's not an exact dupe, but honestly, it's one of the closest I could find. And with the Spiritus Sancti being so far out of reach for most of us, I think this would really be a great plant to get, you know, if you're looking for the features of the Spiritus Sancti. It has that nice deep dark green with the lighter green prominent venation running down the middle, and it really is just a beautiful plant. The last two are for my Hoya lovers out there. You know I couldn't do this video without adding a couple Hoyas to this list. The first Hoya I have is, of course, the Hoya Wilbur Graves. This Hoya is a very sought after plant right now, and it is running for between $200 and $375 for a 2-leaf cutting. It's a very nice, pretty green with a lot of silver splashing. Now, a lot of these plants are getting sold with very little to no silver on them, which, you know, I just think, I sell plants, okay? And if I'm going to sell a plant, especially a plant at this price, I'm going to make sure the plant is, you know, as a plant collector, when I spend money on plants, I want to have the joy of what that plant is actually about. So if I'm going to sell a plant, it's going to have some variegation, or it's at least going to be capable of that variegation. There's a lot of these Wilbur Graves going on right now that are technically labeled like non-splash Wilbur Graves because they just have tiny bits of speckling. So a lot of people are importing these plants, you know, the non-splash Wilbur Graves, and they do have, like I said, little trickles of silver speckling on them, but they're selling them as if they are highly variegated or capable of having that high variegation to them for this outrageous price. So also, that's just another thing, another caution you want to be careful for if you're looking for this plant. Just be aware of, you know, what you're getting. Ask for a picture of the mother plant, things of that nature. A great duplicate for this plant is the Hoya Pubicaylx Super Silver. This plant I found for around $30, and when you're getting a Pubicaylx, you know you're going to get a decent sized plant, okay? So for $30, the plant I found has 6 leaves, compared to buying a 2-leaf cutting for $200 to $300 to $400. That is a great deal. The silver splash, as you can see, I mean, honestly, when I look at this picture, it looks, if it wasn't labeled, I'd be like, oh my goodness, that's a Hoya Wilbur Graves for $30. Let me get it. There are tons of Hoya Pubicaylx that have so much silver in them. If you're looking for that silver splash, again, if you're not buying the plant for the name and you're buying the plant for the way the plant looks, for the features, for the characteristics, this plant is really going to do it for you. It is really such a gorgeous plant. Last but not least, for my Hoya lovers, I have the Hoya Nicholsoniae New Guinea Ghost. This Hoya goes for between $400 to $700, all the way up to $1,200. This Hoya is a really pale, almost silverish green, and it really is gorgeous. Its sun stress is really nice. It has very nice prominent venations. Now, the thing is with this plant, some of the leaves can be kind of more narrower, but the leaves can also get a little more like round, sort of like a chubby look to them. But a good duplicate for this plant I found was the Hoya Lacunosa Full Silver. So the Hoya Lacunosa Full Silver, I found 2 plants, one going for $65, the other going for $68. This plant has the same type of coloring to it. It's that same silvery pale green color. It has the same kind of venations running through it, and it does have that same leaf shape when the leaves are a little more, you know, narrow rather than that chubby look. Again, if you're buying the plant for the characteristics, I think this plant will do very nice in your collection. It will fulfill that need of that, you know, pale green silver, the love for that color. It really does have a nice color to it. The Lacunosas are a pretty easy care Hoya. They are a little of a faster grower, so I don't know how the New Guinea Ghost grows, but I would assume the price is a little higher a lot of times, especially for Hoyas. The price does go up a little bit because they're either harder to propagate or they're slower growers. So if I'm going to assume that's the case for that one, the Lacunosa does grow at a faster pace, which makes it a very great plant for beginners as well. So that is my 8 rare, expensive, uncommon plants and the 8 dupes you could find to get these plants or the characteristics of these plants into your collections. I hope this kind of helped you get your hands on some of the beautiful plants that we aren't able to attain or that are hard to find. Kind of get the variegation, the leaf shape, whatever it is you are looking for or love in those plants. Get some of these plants to add into your collection. Thank you for joining me in another video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're interested in the content I provide. And as always, every plant's a princess. Bye.